Welcome, everyone. We are here with Jason Church. He is running for Congress for your 7th Congressional District. Jason, nice to have you in. Nice to meet you, and thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So the question is, why are you running? What would possess someone to run for Congress? And thank you for doing so. We do need some well-qualified people to run, and we do appreciate your time and effort for this.
Well, thank you. And I never actually intended to be in politics in my life. When I graduated from Menominee High School, just down the road from here, when I'd come up to Rice Lake, typically it was for athletics. I remember playing, Laverne Pottinger's, teams and football, and coming up here and playing some hockey, and certainly competing against some of your, athletes in track. And when I graduated from high school, I went down to lacrosse and did ROTC. And for me, I wanted to serve my country in uniform. That's how I wanted to give back. I've always felt blessed and fortunate to have been born and raised in the USA, and my father served in uniform, my uncle served in uniform, my grandfathers both served in uniform, and for me, I guess you could say it was a little bit of a family business, and that's really what motivated me to get back into the fight, really, and I think it was something that our country needed at the time, certainly. So when I graduated, I commissioned a lieutenant, and I went through, some pretty hard training. I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia after I graduated. Went through Ranger School, Airborne School, and when I graduated both of those things, I went over to Afghanistan where I was a platoon leader. And we were in one of the harshest parts of Afghanistan, and on one very hard day in August, I was injured in an IED blast that resulted in the loss of both my legs. That changed my career ambitions pretty quickly.
Sure.
I wasn't going to be able to serve our country in the capacity that I had always wanted to do. But you know what? The desire to serve never left me. And I always said, even though the Taliban took my legs, America's enemies didn't extinguish my desire to serve. It's still there. It still burns in me. It's a passion. It drives me. It's what motivates me in the morning when I wake up and I put on my legs. And when I moved back to Wisconsin, when I got done with all of the recovery and all of the things that were associated with it, I settled back in Hudson, just down the road from where I grew up. And that's where I was living. And I was working for Senator Johnson at the time. And I was actually looking at getting into some private work, actually, when Congressman Sean Duffy resigned. And my phone began to blow up, and I put it to the side. I didn't want to talk to it. I talked to my fiance first, as I think,
Sure.
Smart
idea.
Yeah,
yes.
right. Yeah, right. And I asked her, is this something that we can do? And she looked at me and she said, Jason, I think that we can do it for the right reasons. I think you're doing it for the right reasons. And you want to serve your country again and give back. And certainly during a time on our nation's trajectory where we need strong conservative leadership, and it's something I want to bring to the Congress every single day, representing a part of the state where I grew up and have called home for the majority of my life.
Very good. Jason, you have traveled throughout the 7th Congressional District throughout your campaign. What are the main concerns that you hear? What is something that most everywhere has some concerns with?
When President Trump announced he was running for office back in 2016, that brought on something here in northern Wisconsin that was inspiring. They saw somebody as a candidate who would fight for them, who would do what he could in Washington for the people up here. That, we work hard. Sometimes it can be a tough sledding up here, literally. And we knew from the get-go this was somebody we wanted to represent us as a president, certainly a majority of us. even over the primary that happened in 2016. You know, the state voted for Ted Cruz, but northern Wisconsin on the whole voted for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. They knew he was a fighter. They knew somebody was going to stick up for him. He knew he was somebody that was going to push back against things that, quite frankly, would be destructive to people up here in northern Wisconsin. And so one of the things that I'm seeing consistently now, certainly over the past couple months in the campaign trail, is a bit of anger about what's happening to the President of the United States. You know, the recent impeachment is something that bothers a lot of people. It bothers me. And the other thing is that right now, we don't have a representative there. And our people right now up here don't have a voice in Washington. And I think that they see what's happening from the left right now as an attack on their vote, an attack on what they believed in 2016, and it becomes an invalidation of it. And for them, they want a fighter. And in this district, they want someone who's going to fight for them. We have a very big district. It's the same reason they've supported the president. It's the same reason that I'm seeing the support that I'm getting, is that they want someone who is going to sometimes go into rooms, make noise, not be someone who's just going to be another rubber stamp vote, but be an active voice for people here. We have a very big district. It's very rural. And sometimes to be able to get your point across in Washington, you kind of have to, you know, be willing to ruffle some feathers and, as I like to say, sometimes throw a grenade in the swamp. They see certain issues that are being pushed right now that scare them, and they want someone who can fight back against it. I mean, for one, let's take a look at the Green New Deal and those things that are being proposed by some members of Congress that, in my opinion, represent constituencies that don't know where the food they eat is produced, don't know where the things they use are manufactured, and are now trying to impose those beliefs upon an entire country, which would be an absolute economic disaster. I mean, let's think about it. I mean, how many farms would be affected by that? How many manufacturers up here would be affected by that? But at the end of the day, these kinds of things can get through even to moderate Democrats, even moderate Republicans sometimes, if you don't have a fighter that understands the needs of this district, that understands that we have a rural district, that understands that our needs are certainly different than southeastern Wisconsin. They're certainly different than, you know, California or Florida. And the fighting aspect of it has to be there, because so much of this country sometimes, and the coast of it, view us as flyover country. And they'll pass us over when they get the chance. When it comes to certain specific issues other than something like the Green New Deal, let's take a look at you know, trade, for example, and things like that. You know, the president identified an issue in China. The Chinese have been manipulating the system for the past 20 years. Since they were admitted into the World Trade Organization, they have stolen intellectual property. They have created mirror companies to undermine American manufacturers. And we're using all this newfound wealth to build up a military that could project power across the globe. They've already built bases in Djibouti, and they're building islands in the South China Sea to interdict a lot of the world's trade and commerce. President Trump's standing up to them, and the people up here like that. But the president also understands that there is some, you know, pain that's being caused by some of this, and that's why he's trying to work on the trade deals he is. That's why he's worked with Japan on some of these things. It's why he's worked with some of our partners, certainly with the renegotiation of NAFTA, now the USMCA, to help you know, dairy farmers, certainly here in northern Wisconsin. And that's something I would like to work with him more on, because I understand that people here, you know, they don't want subsidies. They want to be able to sell their products. We create some of the best things in the world here, whether it's paper, cheese, you name it, up here in the 7th Congressional District. We do it, and we'd like to be able to show the world that we can. And I'd like to work with the president on being able to do that. I can go on the issue list all day, but here, you can, I don't want to just keep talking the whole time.
No, and the 7th Congressional District is very rural. Most of the United States is a very rural area. What are your thoughts on how we can improve infrastructure throughout rural areas of America? We've had in far northern Wisconsin, we've had a lot of issues with flooding and rebuilding. And what are your thoughts on the infrastructure?
I think infrastructure is certainly when you're talking about crossing state lines, or certainly with the interstate or U.S. highway system, a federal priority, because at the end of the day, that's literally the veins that move the blood of our economy. And we need to make sure that, one, it's raised to a level far above what it is right now. I mean, I think the engineers have or not the Army Corps of Engineers, but an evaluating firm has rated our infrastructure like a D+ or something. We need to reinvest in that. Some of that is requiring Congress to work in a bipartisan manner to get through some of the hiccups here, and actually, instead of just making a charade, that's what's going on right now in Congress, and basically a big circus show, to actually do what Congress is supposed to do, and that's legislate and pass bills that the president can sign into law that would authorize and appropriate the money necessary to build the things we need done here. We do have some systems in place right now that facilitate a little bit of red tape that I'd like to see cut. But for me, that is a priority, and it would be one of my priorities in Congress.
Very good. Broadband is very important as well. We've seen moves by the state to do a lot towards that. They've spent tens of millions of dollars to expand it, hopefully to help build and increase jobs in the 7th and more rural areas of Wisconsin. What are your thoughts on broadband and its importance in rural America?
I think it's very important. You see the world now going towards a model of high-speed internet access and being able to do basic tasks. Whether it's ordering, shipping, just doing things that are necessary for business or communicating with family, via broadband. I mean, these are the things nowadays that are becoming an integral part of the American way of life. As a federal legislator, I would like to look at things that come across the desk and make sure that what's being implemented doesn't hamper an ability of a local government's ability to manage land. I mean, the only thing that scares me is when the federal government starts to preempt or use eminent domain to stop a town from being able to dictate how wires are put down. Because I'll tell you, a township up here knows far better the lay of the land than a bureaucrat does in Washington. Mm-hmm. So whenever legislation like this would go forward, while I think it's important, I would always want to make sure that we're not removing the local government from the process. They want this stuff. They do. I mean, obviously, we all do. Mm-hmm. It's just I always get a little scared when there's wiggle room for a bureaucrat in Washington to overimpose upon local municipalities, because, as I've often found, the federal government likes to get its claws in about everything with every excuse it can. So I would do everything in my power to limit that, but I do understand the importance of broadband, and I think it's something that is going to become, if not already, it is an integral part of the American way of life.
Especially for healthcare, when we have clinics that are closing or getting slimmer on staff. What are your thoughts on healthcare? What can the federal government do to help rural areas for healthcare?
Well, I can tell you what not to do, and then I'll tell you what I think can be done. I think the Medicare for All ideas that are being proposed, certainly by some of the opponents in this race and by certain political figures nationally, would be disastrous. And it would be disastrous on the large scale, but it would also be very, very bad for rural medicine. There are certain things that are very unique to rural medicine. I was just at the Marshfield Clinic yesterday, and I was talking with their leadership about the things they're trying to implement. And Marshfield Clinic is one of the largest, or it is the largest employer in this district, and specializes in rural medicine. And one of the things they were talking about with me yesterday was something you just mentioned about the idea of being able to get to patients in some of the more isolated communities up here and being able to provide health care for them. And for them, they feel the best way is to have less regulation upon them to be kind of like a mobile care, being able to talk to a physician via, a phone or via, a broadband connection or Skype or whatever you want to do. Because a lot of the things that can be done, instead of having them drive to a hospital that may be an hour or two away or go to a specialist that could be down in Marshfield or the Twin Cities, they can have this communication with a doc at their home. Look, you know how it is traveling here in the winter, and sometimes the people who are sick and need access to the hospitals the most have the least mobility, certainly under those circumstances. So I think the solution here lies in more transparency for healthcare costs, the ability for insurance to be a little bit more flexible across state lines, and to deregulate to allow innovators like Marshfield Clinic, for example, to expand access to rural medicine. For me, I think that is the solution that we need up here, because I can tell you that a socialized system like Medicare for All, it doesn't work. I can tell you personally, I go to the VA. That is an example of socialized medicine here in the United States. And while some days, I'm not trying to throw everyone who has ever worked at the VA under the bus. I think the VA has great people who work for it, and there are people who will do everything they can for every veteran who ever walks through there. But there is also realities of the system. This is run by a government. This is run by a federal bureaucracy in Washington. And at the end of the day, the people who work there are accountable to a bureaucrat and not necessarily to a patient. And I think that disconnect at times exacerbates the problems. And I can tell you, just looking at how a federal bureaucrat would organize a plan, that rural northern Wisconsin would not necessarily be on the top of their priority list. It's just because a bureaucrat is related to politics, and politicians, well, we all know how they behave. So at the end of the day, I think that the best solution to the healthcare issues that we have in northern Wisconsin is deregulation and innovation, and allowing hospitals like the Marshfield Clinic and others to continue to do what they do to provide the quality care that they do.
Very good. Another thing that comes up during campaigns is a lot of talk about the high cost of education. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are a couple things here. One, I think there's been a problem for the last couple decades that we've been telling children the only way that they're going to have a successful life, career, job, whatever, is by going to a traditional four-year university. It has, I think, exacerbated the dearth of people in trade jobs, certainly up here in northern Wisconsin. We have seen an exodus of people from here leaving. And I think part of it is because they're told they have to go to a four-year institution. They go there, and now because the way the federal government subsidizes the loans, they're going into these places and they're just kind of signing a dotted line, not necessarily knowing that the debt they're incurring has interest, and that when they're done, they're accountable for it. So when they come out with $60,000, $70,000 of debt, and they're barely making the minimums, they're saddled with this for decades. That's not right. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a push to say, look, going to a traditional four-year college isn't the only path. There are a lot of ways to go and get a good job, provide for your family, and be a leader in your communities. The other one is that when you go to college, you understand that it's an investment. Right? And sometimes investments require risk. And so I think the proposals, again, from the Democrats that would say something about eliminating college debt is just not fair to the people who have made this as a conscious choice. I think that universities have used these heightened, inflated tuitions to sometimes, I think, fund some things that, quite frankly, in my opinion, are frivolous. And I think that at the end of the day, if we reform how the system is done at the federal level in terms of granting loans to students, we can eliminate a lot of this fraud and abuse.
All right. Speaking of debt, one concern on many people's minds is the national debt. It's I don't even know what it is anymore.
23 trillion.
Yes. What are we going to do about that? That's a lot of money on everyone.
70,000 per head. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
We are at the highest level of debt since the end of the Second World War as a proportion to gross domestic product. So we are at about 106% right now of our GDP is in debt. That is not sustainable, all right? And so obviously with the amount of money that we have in debt right now, you typically have three solutions that are proposed by politicians, okay? One, raise taxes. I'm not for raising taxes. I think that that takes away money from people who properly invest it, whether it's in their personal lives, family lives, or businesses. And when you do that, you stymie our economy and you prohibit us from growing and continuing the prosperity that has led our nation in the right direction for the past 2 centuries. So I'm pretty firm on that one. Okay. Second one is you take on more debt. Because in order to pay for the things we need to pay for, that's what we've been doing. Okay, we've been taking on more debt. I don't think that's an option. We're continuing to do that, and I think it's going to lead us down a road where we're going to end up paying a lot more money in interest. Or there's a third option. You reform mandatory spending. Right now, we spend 70% of the federal budget on, really, I think the two worst programs right now with this are Medicare and Medicaid, which have a lot of built-in fraud, waste, and abuse in these programs. They need to be rewritten. I don't think that anyone would say that they're operating at an efficient level. And I think that the rules and ways that these were written are arcane and need to be reformatted. Social Security, for me, that's something that people have paid into for decades. And there was an expectation that this money was going to come to them when they retired. So to me, that's unfair. That's not the federal government's money. That's the people who put that in there's money. My issue is the federal government has abused the system, really, and kind of basically been taking from that coffer to fund other things. That needs to stop. And then obviously the other biggest part of the debt is the interest that we pay on it. So in order to do these things, you need to reform how we're spending the money in the first place. We need to rewrite the formulas. We need to make good decisions on realizing how inefficient certainly Medicare and Medicaid are operating under. And then look at what it's doing to other parts of the budget. People have this assumption that, we spend, more money on the military. We spend more money on, on the four things I just mentioned than we do on the military. Easily. We spend more. Of the 30% of money that is discretionary, only half that's going to the military right now. And to me, that's a priority of the federal government. Securing our borders is a priority of the federal government. Homeland Security is a priority of our federal government. These are things that it was designed to do. And instead now, as these things are getting squeezed down more and more, our ability to properly do them diminishes. So I think it's a very large issue and something that in Congress we need to make a hard look at and addressing before, quite frankly, it becomes a nightmare scenario in 2 decades. We're already taxing my unborn children.
Jason, confidence in Congress and having Congress make any progress is
Low.
Very low. What are your thoughts on, can these people work together and get together and do good once again for the country?
I think there's a couple things that I'll hit on with this. One, the problems with the approval rating in Congress started back in the 60s. When Lyndon B. Johnson declared war on poverty, he greatly expanded the role of the federal government. And he did it in such a way that it basically put a lot more onus on the Congress and the federal government to do more than it was intended by the founders of this country. And not that, poverty is a bad thing. We should do everything we can to eliminate it. I just don't think that the Congress was designed to be the most effective mechanism here. And what it's done is when you try to get Congress to do something that it's not designed to do, what happens? People get mad at it. It doesn't work. It doesn't function. And when we ask it to do things it wasn't designed to do, no wonder we get this. No wonder. And then the things that it is designed to do, it's being blinded by the hyper-partisanship that exists right now, in my opinion, from the other side of the aisle that can't come to the grips that President Trump is the president. So instead of working with him, instead of working to get things done with infrastructure, instead of working to get USMCA passed a year ago, instead of working to do some much needed immigration reform with the statutes, we're playing political games. Because at the end of the day, that's what happens when you elect career politicians. It's what happens when you elect people who are just simply trying to move up the ladder, because all they're trying to do is save their job. And to me, that was not the intention of the founders. Going to Congress was a sacrifice that you did, for a few terms, and then you came back. But now people are trying to make this a career. And I think that's part of the problem. I think it's part of the reason why people have such low opinion of Congress. And it's also part of the reason why I've had some of the endorsements and help that I've been having. People like Senator Tom Cotton, people like Senator Joni Ernst, Congressman Dan Crenshaw, Congressman Brian Mast. These are all veterans and conservatives who see me as someone who can join them on the Hill and actually fighting back against a lot of this stuff. Because at the end of the day, if I'm elected, I'm one of 435 members of Congress. You had 100 senators, that's 535. Anybody out there would say I'm lying to them if I'm going to go in there, beat the drums, and make change. You have to have people who also think the same way you do, who understand the problems in the same way you do, that can make a difference. And for me, it'd be an honor to join them in that, and to, I think, really not only help the president do what needs to be done in the country, but also, I think, bring back some respectability to that institution.
Very good answer. Jason, we have a couple minutes left. Maybe just finish out this segment with any tips or any highlights that we didn't cover of your thoughts or why people should vote for you.
I'm not a politician. I never thought about doing this in my life. For me, I want to serve my country again. And right now we're on a trajectory that is scary, and if we don't make the changes needed now, I don't know what the future will hold. For me, it's about service and sacrifice. It's why I'm running for Congress. It's why I ask for your vote. It's why I ask for your support. And it's why I ask you to lace your boots up with me and join my platoon here. We've got a great groundswelling of support here, and I think we can bring the fight to Washington that not only we need here, up in northwestern Wisconsin, but northern Wisconsin and the 7th Congressional District as a whole. So I ask for your vote, I ask for your support, and I look forward to meeting a lot of you.
Very good. Jason Church, get out and vote on February 18th.
Yes.
And also May, you might have the date on this?
May 12th.
May 12th. All right. Thank you so much,
No
Jason,
problem.
for coming in. And we'll see you at the ballot.
Thank you.